The 5 major problems with universal mail-in voting. First of all, universal mail-in voting is different than existing absentee ballot voting. With universal mail-in ballots, every voter gets a ballot in the mail. With our existing absentee ballot system, voters must request an absentee ballot in order to receive one in the mail. That distinction is very important for several reasons. If every voter gets a ballot by mail and then is supposed to return a ballot by mail, that places an enormously different burden on election systems, whether it's the mail service in the post office or the system to validate signatures. If everybody gets a ballot by mail automatically, that also encourages ballot harvesting, which means third-party individuals showing up at your door to try to collect your ballot, which leads to problems we'll discuss in a moment. But this difference between universal mail-in voting and existing absentee ballots is critical, so don't let Democrats tell you there is no difference. So there are 5 major problems with universal mail-in voting. Number 1, we already have proof that mail-in voting leads to ballot harvesting and ballot piracy. In California, North Carolina, and Texas, people have been either caught or convicted of ballot harvesting already. Specifically in Texas, ballot pirates intercepted the mail-in ballots of older voters and forced them to sign the ballots that were already filled out. In California, Democratic operatives were caught offering to return ballots to polling locations for voters, but only if the voters were Democrats. In North Carolina, a Republican candidate was rightly forced to drop out of his race after he was caught engaging in an illegal ballot harvesting scheme. That's number 1. Number 2, post office incompetence is a real issue. In New York, 20,000 mail-in ballots were not postmarked by the post office and were thrown out after the recent election. Then, a judge ruled that those ballots must be counted. Now, the problems with this are obvious. If the ballots are legitimate and the post office incompetence is to blame, then throwing out the ballots without postmarks is the definition of voter disenfranchisement. If the ballots cannot be certified or verified as legitimate and there's a possibility of fraud, then counting the ballots without postmarks is also the definition of voter disenfranchisement. It's a lose-lose. That's number 2. Number 3, elections, especially down-ballot races, are often decided by razor-thin margins. In the state of Florida, for example, the gubernatorial race in 2018 was decided by just 30,000 votes. In Ohio, a congressional race was decided by mere hundreds of votes. So the accuracy of which ballots are valid and which are not is very, very important. That's number 3. Number 4, our system of government requires definitive outcomes to elections, obviously. But look at New York. We're weeks out from one statewide election and we don't have definitive outcomes because of the mail-in voting. That's number 4. Number 5. Finally, a new CDC study shows there was no spike in COVID-19 cases after the Wisconsin elections, so the argument that people can't risk their health to vote in person is moot. The heart of the matter is this: there is tremendous vulnerability to fraud and incompetence and inaccuracy with universal mail-in voting. And we shouldn't wait for this to happen, for fraud and incompetence related to universal mail-in voting to ruin an election before we protect against it.